Welcome, everybody, to the AI Governance Strategies in the Compliance Gray Zone. My name is Deepak Singh. I'm our Associate General Counsel and Data Privacy Officer here at Tekion. And I'd like to introduce my co-panelists.
I'm Nitika. I had the engineering team for AI and been in the related industry for 13 plus years.
Very cool. So we've got some interesting insights for all of you. And just by way of introduction, I have been at Tekion now for almost 4 years. I supervise our product engineering as well as legal functions as it relates to product development. And so work very closely with Nitika and her team on AI development and governance and those sorts of wonderful things that I'm sure all of you are interested in hearing about. So with further ado, let's go and get started. In terms of an agenda, a couple of items that we're going to talk about. Everybody hears about AI. Frankly, you can walk around and see a number of vendors that are selling various products and services that incorporate AI or even have AI in the name of the business itself. So which raises the question, why is AI compliance important? And I think the most important thing to really think about is, and we'll dive a bit further into that during the conversation, but really just how it affects your business and how it affects your customers, right? Because that is actually at the front of most customers' minds is when they are interacting with generative AI or AI tools, they've heard one thing, but how it actually plays out in their day-to-day experience in your business ultimately affects how they perceive you and perceive the whole process of going through your business and dealership. So we will talk a bit about that. From there, we'll talk about the key legal frameworks that are being proposed to govern AI. So things like the EU AI Act, the FTC has really some guidance and proposed some guidance on how AI should be regulated. And also just the various state rules and orders that are going to be coming into effect over the coming year. From there, we're going to look at some of the AI governance best practices. So you can see kind of best practices that we think are best able to provide you with a compliance blanket to protect you from possible risk and using the tools in your business, make sure that it's going in a way that's really going to benefit you without bringing risk to your business. And then from there, we'll talk a bit about how we as Tekion actually incorporate those practices into our own business. And Nitika will share some practices and experience on her end from the product side. And so you get to see some of that in real time and see how we've done it for our own business. And then finally, we will talk about what's coming up in AI compliance and what's next. What do you see on the horizon, right? So horizon scanning so that you can also anticipate when you're looking at different tools, how is that going to look in about 5 years when new rules have come out in place? So on our first topic about why AI compliance is important, I think this goes without saying, but the first and foremost risk is the risk of lawsuit, right? So if you're putting a tool out there that has biased data, that is giving biased recommendations, it's not transparent, you're potentially opening up your business for a number of different risks. So an example would be if you're using AI software within the hiring practice. So is your AI tool giving you recommendations on hiring somebody in a way that is actually transparent and fair, or is it perpetuating biases that then open up your business to possible discrimination claims? So that I think goes without saying, but is a very important and real risk that we have to think about with any new technology that comes into play. The second, and I think again, this goes without saying, the rules are going to be required by the government. So the FTC has been very active in terms of what they regulate, particularly with dealerships. But along those lines, they've also said that they believe the rules for regulating AI is already there. So they're going to look at Section 5 of the FTC Act. They're going to be looking at various rules and tools available to them to make sure that businesses are not only developing AI in a way that's transparent, but also in a way deploying it in a way that is fair and actually benefiting consumers in the end. And then third, but probably just as important, is it increases confidence in your product, right? So as a good example, and some of you may have heard, there was very recently an example or a story of a dealership that had incorporated a chat support bot based on ChatGPT. And users very quickly figured out that if you go on the website, you interact with this chatbot, you can get it to negotiate down the price of a vehicle and offer you a vehicle for something as low as $1. And so there's some very funny examples of users going on posting this on Twitter or posting this on social media where they interacted with a chatbot and pretended to be the manager of the dealership and then got the chatbot to sell them the vehicle for $1. And so again, there's not really a compliance risk there, but there is the risk of how your consumers perceive your business if they all of a sudden can't feel like they can rely on the tools you're using to make their experience a little bit better. On that note, let's talk a little bit about what the rules are and generally speaking, what do we expect to see? So at a very high level, you have the EU AI Act, which again governs EU businesses and government agencies, but is a good framework for us to look at, especially in terms of thinking about how this might apply to the U.S. And what the EU does is they look at AI tools with a risk framework, and so they'll look at something from unacceptable. So they categorize tools into 4 different categories. There's unacceptable tools, there is high risk tools, there's minimal risk, and then there's limited risk. And that is a gradient that will kind of be applied across the tools to determine whether or not they can be developed and what kind of governance frameworks a business has to put into place before they actually use these tools. So an example of an unacceptable tool would be something that uses, social scoring. So looking at individuals based on who they are and then making a decision on whether or not they receive a social score based on it. So that is an unacceptable risk, down all the way to limited risks where you have things like chatbots. And a chatbot generally is going to be interacting with the customer, but not with any sensitive data. So typically that will fall into a more limited use risk case. But the important thing is that non-compliance with these rules can lead to very significant fines. And so even if your business ultimately doesn't get tagged for a fine, the fact that you now have this additional scrutiny, it adds to the cost of business and making sure that you are complying with the rules as they come up. We also have AI executive orders, which are, again, geared more towards the developers of AI, but will translate down to the deployers and the companies who are actually using these tools to make sure that they also are ensuring that the developers are using transparency and the right tools when they're developing their products. We also have the FTC guidelines, which I alluded to. And again, the FTC believes, and they actually just very recently in their FTC Tech Summit last week, said that they believe that they have all the tools already on the books. All the rules that they need to govern AI is already there. And so they're going to be looking at transparency, making sure that companies that are actually utilizing AI are going to be doing it in a way that's transparent, that the data that they're using is easy for a dealer to understand and figure out why the AI tool made a decision that it did and be able to explain that. And I know, Nitika, you're going to be talking a bit about that. So we'll dive a bit more into how Tekion, we've incorporated that into ours. Also, fairness is a big thing. So making sure that there isn't any algorithmic bias, and that if those biases are there in the data, that they're at least accounted for. So going back to the example I brought up at the beginning, making sure that if you're using AI for hiring, that you're doing it in a way that's not going to perpetuate further bias. Or if you're using it to make credit decisions, that you're also doing it in a way that's easily explainable without giving just a yes or a no or a vague answer to a consumer about why they weren't able to get their credit application. And so, again, these are all kind of just proposed guidelines, but at a high level, from a business standpoint, it can seem a little overwhelming because with all these different rules, like how is this going to apply to AI? How are we going to govern ourselves? And in reality, we already have the tools. We already know what it is that we need to comply with and best practices that we can put into place to make sure that you're staying ahead of that. And so that when those rules actually do come out, as a business, you're already prepared for it, and that the tools you're using are already geared towards ensuring compliance. So on that note, one of the key tips that we would recommend from an AI governance standpoint is look at your vendors and actually dive into what it is that they're doing. Like they may, a lot of companies have very snazzy designs, a lot of really interesting demo spaces, but actually ask them, how does your model work? What is it doing? Where's the data it's pulling from? And do the same due diligence that you would do for any other vendor. And dealerships are in a unique position because they have the safeguard rule, which requires them to actually vet their dealers and make sure that they have the right security practices in place. And so as part of that, it's really just an additional set of questions to then also make sure that the AI tools that you're bringing on also follow the same due diligence process. So That's a simple fix. It's a very simple step that you can just build into what you already are doing without really too much additional lift. Along those lines, also just demand evidence to prove what the AI tool says it can do. Often it's easy to say an AI tool will streamline your business, will make everything up that you do super easy, will replace all a need for employees. And so I think just common sense, ask how does it do that? Where does it come from? Show me the metrics that actually demonstrate or support your claims. Along those lines, also just understand the data sources. So if the data that the tool is pulling from is either incomplete or inaccurate, not only is that opening you up to compliance risks, it's also opening you up to a tool that might not work very well. And so there's a twofold benefit there of making sure that you understand where the data is coming from that you're ultimately using. Also, we've talked about explainability and transparency. So if a vendor cannot tell you, why a decision was made, that potentially will get you in trouble as a dealer, because if the FTC comes knocking on your door and says, hey, you made a credit decision about this consumer, how did that decision come about? And you can't explain it, you're ultimately the one on the hook. So it's part of the process of just doing the due diligence on your vendors. I also would like to say that cybersecurity, again, that's very straightforward, but having security of data is also an important piece of all of this. So making sure that the vendor is actually not only providing you a tool that works, but also is secure, that able to really capture and secure the data that you are feeding to it. Because again, if you're going to use sensitive data in order to benefit your business, you want to make sure that that data is actually securely stored and won't be used for further training or potentially spit back out to another user of the tool in the future. On that note, let me switch it over then to you, Nitika, and let you talk a little bit about how these principles fit into our business.
Thanks, Deepak. So before I jump into the principles, right, why this topic is very important. This is not only important for dealership, it is also important for vendor. Even vendors are not looking at their AI solutions at this angle. They are just selling it, okay, we have AI solutions, even though they might not have, or dealers don't have sufficient information about these principles, what they should be asking about, right? So that's why this topic is really important. What is responsible AI, right? Responsible AI is just not a principle. It's a roadmap that guides us to build an AI system which is safe, which is ethical, and so on. There are 5 major pillars of responsible AI, starting with accountability. Here, the accountability, the developers, your AI system provider need to be accountable on what is the output coming from your AI system. For instance, the example what Deepak mentioned on hiring, right? You might have implemented, used an AI hiring system, but that company is responsible if there is a discrimination based on gender or economic background for the hiring, right? It's not only the developers, even the company who is implementing the solutions. Second is privacy and security. Users should be able to know that there is a consent needed for that particular data, how their data is being used, how is it collected, and so on. So privacy and security is really important in terms of if their personal data is being used in any AI model, how it is being used and transmitted over. The third one is the fairness. When we talk about fairness, fairness is nothing but whenever you are designing any AI system, right, the design need to be human-centric. What it means is you need to consider the human values, that if your outcome of AI system, how does it impact a particular individual? You need to drill down and think about those factors. For instance, if you are building AI-based pricing recommendation or financing option recommendations, right, it should not discriminate. If you're deciding the credit line for any individual, it should not discriminate the economic background or the gender. So vendors and AI partners should be wary of that fact. The fourth one is the transparency, which again Deepak briefly spoke about. What transparency is, basically AI partners should be able to answer at any point of time why a particular decision was made from AI. Their output should be interpretable for the non-tech users. That's the demand for the transparency principle. The last one is the robustness, which is that your AI systems should be resilient for the hacking, should be resilient for the basically errors and failures, which can lead to harmful decisions. So how do we take care of those principles? How does Tekion AI platform design any of the AI solutions today, right? So again, as I started with human-centric design, where we are taking care of human values within the design while designing the AI system, right? It starts with a business use case. We get a business use case from either the dealership, or we think this is going to help the dealership. We start with that use case. But first is to understand what is the intent of that use case. Is that intent of the use case to help dealers, or is it going to somehow end up maybe harming the dealers, right? So intent really need to be clear. So first question we should ask, and we are asking, is who are the end user of this? Are the end user service advisor, technician, customer, dealer? Clearing that concept is really, really important, that who are the audience of this particular AI system. And the second question within that use case, what we ask is, what's the outcome expected from this? How is it going to impact, right? Is the outcome, let's say this person will be hired, or the outcome is going to be, oh, credit, no, we cannot give you the credit line because you don't have sufficient score. Once we are clear on the outcome, then we can decide, does this, in which risk area does this fall under? Is it a high risk? Should we even work upon it, or should we say, no, we don't want to work on an AI system like that, which can result in a harmful decision? The second part, when it is clear, and it is clear from the risk perspective, is what is the right data for this particular model? Do we have that right data? Second question, do we have the consent from the user to use that particular data? If not, let's first collect the data as well as the consent from the users. After getting that, then the third very critical question what we look for, should we build this in-house, or should we buy this from our partners? Because a lot of partners already has developed models. If you go for AWS, Google, and so on. But one thing to note here is, usually partner models are very generic, which might not fit into your niche use case. So a lot of the time, because in automotive industry, we end up building our own models. So mostly it is in-house. But in case we are choosing the partner model or assistance, we ask the same questions to partner as well. How have you built the model, right? What data will go in? Do we have the right contract? Is there a personal information going through the partner? And so on. And if we decide to build it in-house, after it's a part of AI design where we see if the outcome, how the outcome is impacting the end user. If all of this is decided and the risk assessment is done, if it is bad or if it is okay as a risk, it will not impact a lot to the customer, we go ahead and deploy our models. After deploying the models, very key step, which is usually missed, is a validation. When we say validation, is basically checking that if your outcome is varying based on the gender, based on the race, based on the economic disparity, so that our result itself is not biased towards a particular user. So this particular validation is really important for the governance part. And one more factor for the governance is the continuous feedback for the system, so that we keep on improving based on the user feedback and based on if there are any gaps in the system. So what's next in AI compliance, right? And can we define and say, oh, this is the AI compliance, let's do it and that's it? No, nothing like that. It's going to change each and every year. It's going to be more stringent over the years. And there are few reasons for that. There are like rapid tech advancements which is happening. GPT has existed, I think, more than 3-4 years back. GPT-1, GPT-2 was launched. Last year we got GPT-3 and 3.5 and so on. And the amount of data which these GPT models consume is in trillions and trillions of that. And you can see from the parameters, like AlexNet was launched in 2012 with only 60 million parameters. But Google launched LLM in 2023 with 1.6 trillion parameters. It's a huge amount of data. Just imagine how many, like data privacy and compliance things you have to check in the data, because that model itself has so much information inbuilt within the system, right? So we need AI compliances which can take care of such tech advancements. The second point is increasing public awareness. The way smartly OpenAI launched ChatGPT, where each and every non-tech user is aware of what is ChatGPT and they use it in any day-to-day process, every user is aware of and asking the right questions. Am I giving it my personal data? How the data is being utilized? how is ChatGPT able to answer some personal question of mine, right? And once the user are getting and once user are aware of all those facts, in turn, what they are demanding is better AI compliances. Like, I don't want to share my data. How do I move ahead? So government will come up with better and better AI compliances over the year. The third one is basically the economic impact. There are a lot of rumors going on AI will replace the jobs and so on. Because of that factor, it's also government will keep on implementing more compliances so that it clears up the fear in the market that it is not here to replace the job, but it is here to assist users in better efficiency. Having said that, I think, Deepa, we can end.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think our last session, if you had a chance to catch that, Padram kind of said this the best, right? Like AI isn't really meant to replace us. It's a tool, much like anything else. And like any tool, you have to be able to use it the right way. And so for us, as Nitika was alluding to, one of our key responsibilities is making sure that the tools we are building are scalable and that they keep up with these regulations. And to that end, we have a data governance committee that we're forming. We have an AI governance policy that we're in the process of finalizing. And these are going to be flexible approaches that allow us as a business to stay on top of this. Because at the end of the day, to your point, Nitika, whether it's a dealership, OEM, whoever it may be, if they're implementing a tool in their business, they're, as much as they want to go back and ask all these questions that we've suggested, it's tough, right? Their job is really to run the business. And so to the best that we can provide tools that are already taking those compliance check boxes away from them, that can kind of help further the adoption of these tools and making sure that they actually do what they're supposed to, which is improve efficiencies and improve the operation of different businesses. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.